So I ordered a bag of bugs. This is dirty, algae-covered rocks out of the muck of my koi pond. So the first thing I did to each of these was add a catopole. And I want a reproductive culture happening in the substrate and under the leaves and the other debris I put in here. Hey, it's Brock here with Uncommon Aquatics. And today we're going to be setting up a complete self-sustaining ecosystem in this small glass bowl. And when I say self-sustaining, I don't mean that you'll never have to do anything. But we're trying to get as close to the absolute minimum of maintenance as you can possibly get. There'll be some evaporation and we'll have to add water back. You may be adding some fish food or some debris for the microorganisms or something like that. But the goal here is to have something that's nice to look at, that can last for years, and basically take care of itself because it's a balanced ecosystem. So to have a balanced ecosystem in this water, we need a fish or multiple fish, we need plants, we need bacteria, algae would be a good thing, and we need microfauna. And I think microfauna is one of the things that gets left out of this type of build most of the time. I've watched every nanotech video I can find, and other videos setting up these type of small bowls as an ecosystem. And honestly, a lot of those are just absolute works of art that look nicer than what I'm going to build. Those people that I'm specifically talking about have tremendously good videos that focus on the aquascaping. And they do a phenomenal job of aquascaping, but it's something that would have to be maintained or run its course and be taken apart and redone. And I would like to set this up and just enjoy it going forward. So the first thing we're going to do is use an organic potting soil as the base. And I'm a fan in my planted tanks, which this isn't really a planted tank. This is a brackish tank that I'm doing some tests with to see if I can grow plants in brackish water. And most people say you can't. These plants are kind of new in here. We'll find out over time. But I like a deep substrate, and I'm not going to go too in detail with that right now, but I think for this type of tank, we want some potting soil. My thought was I'm going to do this as cheap as possible, so I went to Walmart and I got some organic potting mix. I also got this compost biochar. These bags were like $7 and $5. This bag of biochar has mycorrhizal fungi, which naturally increases microbial activity and enhances seed germination and strengthens roots. I think it would be a good thing to mix in. A lot of people use something like lava rock to mix in with their potting soil, but I ultimately decided to use some Fluval stratum, which if you've not heard of this stuff, it's a phenomenal product that acts as a buffer. It will lower your pH. It's kind of like tiny little lava rock that's super porous. It's got nutrients in the actual potting soil. It's the perfect size for shrimp and other microfauna to burrow down into. I think this is a phenomenal substrate. But we're going to start with a layer of this potting soil, and we don't need very much of it. So when I first got into fish keeping a decade ago, I read the Wallstead method. And she was an awesome pioneer, but I hadn't thought about her in a while, really, until this morning. I was doing some searches on these type of tanks, and I found she had a recent video published on another channel that I watch, and so I've just watched a refresher from her. And she said she does an inch deep. That's what I've done in the past. So we pack in an inch here. It doesn't really need to be packed. Now we need to add some water to it because we need to saturate this and soak it before putting anything else in. And I actually think I'm going to go a little bit deeper than an inch. The reason I'm going deeper than an inch with this is because I want a total of 3 to 4 inches of substrate, because I'm wanting one giant centerpiece plant here that grows out of the water and will really need those nutrients. Okay, so even though I packed this in here, now I'm going to stir it up, make sure it's totally saturated. I really didn't need to put this much water in. Okay, so now we've got this saturated dirt. We're going to add our fluval stratum on top of it. Volcanic soil for planted aquariums. Stimulates strong plant growth, promotes neutral to mildly acidic pH for plants and shrimp. And I'm once again going to do a thick layer of this. You want to see the texture? It's like little micro beads. Now we're going to flatten that out. Some of that water is kind of soaking up, but I'm going to add just a little bit more. I want all this to be damp. So now what we've created is a soil bed that will be ideal for growing plants in, because there's a lot of nutrients in this and a lot of depth of soil that gives room for the roots of a bigger plant. This is dirty, algae-covered rocks out of the muck of my koi pond. And what I'm doing this for is I want this to be alive. I also kind of want the main part of the substrate that you see to be this nice uniform dark rock, or this fluval stratum. But I want the bacteria and the algae and anything else living on this pond rocks to be in this ecosystem. So I brought in some of their water, and I'm making this little pile of rocks back here that are from that dirty pond. And my pond water is healthy. It's full of koi fish, but it's not clean. It's alive. There are a lot of living organisms in that rock. Then I'm using a little bit of a dam right here to hold that back, and that dam is a piece of coconut shell with Java moss on it that I picked up at PetSmart. So these rocks are bringing life into this water as soon as we add the water. And they're also going to serve as a phenomenal hiding place for different sizes of animals. If we have breeding fish in here, we have breeding shrimp, we have breeding microfauna that we're going to be adding at different sizes. Some of them can hide in this fluval stratum, and some of them need a bigger hiding spot like these rocks. Then I've got this pre-soaked piece of driftwood that I picked up at a local fish store. And we're going to put that in right here. It's already soaked and ready to stay sunken. Now I've placed this in here to see where I want it, and I think I like it right where it is. But before we place it in there, we're going to dry the top off of it, and we're going to attach some rhizome plants. So we have several small to medium-sized pieces of Java fern, and we have some super glue gel. And we're going to attach these rhizome plants right onto here. I just pressing them into that super glue and holding it there for a second. These are tiny little pieces that came off of other plants. That's how this plant propagates, if you're not familiar with Java fern. So these were on the leaves of another Java fern in this tank, except for this larger one was not. Okay, so now we have our piece of driftwood with our plants attached. Now at this point, a lot of people would let this soak for a day, drain the water out, and then refill it before adding their plants. I'm not putting any fish or anything alive in here except for the plants for a few days, and they will not mind that cloudy water. If I needed to add the fish today, then I would try to rinse this out a little bit and make sure I had some more clean water, but I do not think that's necessary for what we're actually working on. So now we have some dwarf Sagittaria, and that is going to go towards the outside on each side. Push it down in. Some more Java fern. Here we have micro swords. I'm going to separate some of this micro sword as gently as I can, which is not that gentle really. I don't want to just put it all in one place. Now I mentioned earlier wanting to have one main giant plant through the middle. This is an Amazon sword. Now typically I do not buy plants in these tubes because in this tube that tells you that this was grown out of air. I like to buy these plants that have been in water from the fish store. This was not grown submerged in water. This was grown with all the leaves being out of the water, and that means it needs to die off and grow new leaves that are used to being out of the water, being fully submerged. But what I want in this case is I'd like this plant to be up here and all the leaves coming out of the top. So here we have that Amazon sword. I was really hoping it would be taller on the initial setup, but we can work with this. Now we're going to start adding our water. Also going to add a little bit of dechlorinator. Not a big deal for the plants, but we'll do it anyway. I've got a few more plants here. One of those is a piece of water lettuce that we're just going to float on top. That water lettuce is not something I just bought. It came from the pond. And I almost forgot about this guy, which is Crypt Parva. A true aquatic mid to foreground moderate light plant. Very small. Of course, we're not going to be able to see this right now with our cloudy water. I'll put this Crypt Parva right at the front. I think I'll add one more piece of water lettuce in here. This one's kind of small. This water lettuce, I'm not thinking will permanently be in here, but it's possible. If it does well, I'll be removing pieces of it because it multiplies and gets pretty large. So what most of the videos I've seen do at this point is wait for the water to clear, add a fish or a few small fish, and say thanks for watching. But I actually don't think this is close to an ecosystem yet. By bringing in the rock from the pond, we now have microorganisms. By bringing in the plants that came from other planted aquariums, we have microorganisms, we have bacteria, we have an active substrate that's going to provide nutrients. We've done a lot just by setting this up right here. But there's a couple more steps that I think really matter. So we're going to come back whenever I've got everything else ready and this is clear, and we're going to finish this and make it an ecosystem. So with most of the setups like this I've seen on YouTube, everybody kind of aquascapes the bowl, puts their plants in, puts a fish in, and that's the end of the video. But I think there's a lot more to it. As a beginning aquarist, the first thing you think of is a glass container with a fish in it. Then at some point you say that fish can't survive without bacteria. So now we have a symbiotic relationship between the fish producing waste and the bacteria processing that waste. Then at some point you realize that if you can add live plants, now we have a three-part symbiotic relationship needed to sustain life. But really, ideally, and in nature, you have about 1,000-part. It's got layers to it. And there's a lot more life living in that. So I've done a few more things to fill in the gap between a fish and a bacteria. There's a huge gap in microfauna in between there. So the next thing I did was added catappa leaves. Catappa leaves have healing properties for bettas, and they are great for microfauna like shrimp and even the smaller microfauna that we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing I did to each of these was add a catappa leaf. And the catappa leaf can have a side effect of turning your water a little bit brown. But if you look at these have been allowed to sit for about a week with the setup you've already seen, plus a catappa leaf, and then I've added in a couple snails. And I think they look perfectly fine. I would be proud to have this setting on my desk or an end table in my house. But my focus in this project is not just an aesthetically pleasing outcome. I want a full ecosystem in this small container. And we have a delivery. I've ordered a bunch of microorganisms to live in here that will be here. They're overnight delivery. They will be here later today. But right now we're going to add our centerpiece, which is this, I believe it was called a mustard betta. It's just from PetSmart, but I went to a lot of niche pet stores and I was really selective about finding a betta that was active in this little bowl. Also had good coloration, interesting coloration, and long, flowing, undamaged fins. And I settled on this guy. So we're going to go ahead and add him to this bigger bowl here. And as I do that, I want to talk about the other two bowls that you see off to the side. I'm about to introduce you to a bunch of microorganisms that are going to complete the ecosystem in this bowl. But for that to happen, they have to be reproducing at a rate where this guy can eat some of them. He's going to eat the shrimp and the scuds and the daphnia and all the other things that are living in here, but not eat them so fast that he destroys their population. I want a reproductive culture happening in the substrate and under the leaves and the other debris I put in here where they're protected, and the betta can only eat the ones that come up. So we're going to dump a little bit of his water. I've already let it sit in here to temperature acclimate. And then we're going to scoop in some of the water from our bowl and see how he reacts. He's kind of pouncing around. And we're going to let out a little more water. And we're going to do that a few times until he swims out. Now, a lot of people think that it's inhumane to keep a betta in a small container. And I think it's inhumane to keep a betta in this container. This is not enough room for them. But in nature, the betta fish does not live in big lakes or ponds. They live in tiny little puddles, trenches, ditches, drainways that can even go dry. And sometimes they die because of that. But they mainly inhabit very small bodies of water in nature. And if you put them in large aquariums, they're not actively darting all over the aquarium. They are kind of hanging out in one little spot. And they're a labyrinth fish, which means they can breathe atmospheric air from the top. So no fish is meant to be kept in a cup. But the betta fish is kept in cups because it's more suited to it than any other fish that exist. So this container would hold 3.5 gallons of water with the substrate and the plants and the rocks and the wood, and not being full to the brim. There's probably 2.5 gallons of water in here right now. So I think this is a perfectly suitable home for this little guy. And actually, I don't think I finished my previous thought. The reason I have these two bowls here is these are going to be breeding containers. I'm going to have shrimp and scuds and the microfauna only in these. And if the betta eats all of my microfauna out of this container, I'm going to let them breed so heavily in these two that they're just thick as thieves in there, and then I'll start reintroducing them to the betta bowl. And there he goes. And he, originally, his initial thought is going to be, dang, this thing's huge. Because his entire life, he's never been in a body of water this size, even though it's still very small. And I will mention, I said I let this sit for a week. In that week, I've been monitoring the water conditions. And there's no ammonia and there's no nitrites in here, even though I tried to get some. You know, I put in the beneficial bacteria to process nitrites and ammonia. But I also put in fish food. So there has been a biological process happening in this aquarium for the last 10 days. So now the final piece of the puzzle has come in. We have our microfauna. Now, I ordered all of this from Phillips Fish Works after doing a lot of research. And before I go to that, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but there are 2 nerite snails in each of these bowls. There's also another detail about this bowl I didn't mention, is why do I need 2 of these smaller bowls to breed out the cultures in? And the answer is, I want to build a culture like this in my large 125-gallon brackish tank back here. But nobody seems to know whether these microfauna can live in brackish water. So this tank is 1.006 specific gravity. That's the salt content in that tank. This one is half that. So I'm going to try growing this microfauna in half salinity, which is still like 10% of total saltwater salinity. And then I'm going to increase this salinity if they survive and see if the microfauna can live in the brackish tank, because I'd like to have a population of it there too. Although there are a lot of predators, I'm not sure how well it would make it. I'd have to add a lot. So let me show you what I got here. So I ordered a bag of bugs, which is all this leaves mixed with a whole bunch of tiny organisms. And I can see them swimming around in there. They're minuscule. They're not so small that you can't see them, but they're like a quarter of the size of a little ghost shrimp. And then all of these leaves and these little gumballs, these little prickly things in here, are what they feed on, and it's what makes their water ideal for them. So I'm going to split the contents of each of these bags I'm going to show you between the aquariums and add in all these leaves. I'm not going to remove any floating debris in any of the bags. That's all part of the picture. Some of that water's pouring out. I'm adding some of these leaves, even though I already have some leaves. And then we're pouring a lot more water. This bag of bugs, I will put a link to his website where you can check out what comes in this. It's got a lot of things. There's snails in it. It comes with plants, but the plants are in another bag. You really get a lot with this. So as I watched that sink to the bottom, I could see a lot of things swimming around in it, even whenever I got to the last bowl. So what we've just added is a tremendous amount of life. Now that life is food for the betta. It's also going to eat the waste from the betta and reproduce and perform a lot of functions. Here we have another bag. This has scuds in it. These look like tiny little shrimp. They're in with a leaf. Now I should know, but I don't. I ordered Daphnia, I ordered scuds, I ordered something called Molina, but every bit of this is alive and swimming in here. You see all that? There are 1,000 or several thousand living organisms in this bag. And we are just going to pour it in the water. Okay. Here's another bag just like that one that is just teeming with life. There are so many living creatures in here. It's unbelievable. And those are the same. They have a place in the ecosystem. They help the water. They are food for the betta. They process dead and dying plants. They add nutrients to the soil. They aerate the soil. They have a valuable role to play. Now, because I've followed the YouTube channel that produces these, which is Phillips Fish Works, I know that all of these contain living creatures. We've got a snail right there on the plant, and I wish I knew, but I don't, what kind of plant that is. So I'll look it up. I bet it tells on the website where I ordered it. But until then, until I find out, I'm just going to let it float in this main bowl. And we've got more of that same plant here in this bag, but this bag has our Neocaridina shrimp in it. I've got 2 bags, and each bag has a dozen shrimp in it. Now the shrimp will be the largest inhabitants of the 2 smaller bowls. And I'm actually going to have to take a little bit of water out of these to add the shrimp. So what have I done here? I've added thousands and thousands of living organisms to this bowl that are microscopic. And I'm watching right now, that betta is eating those organisms. But there's so many of them that I don't think he can eat them before they get hidden. They make their little homes in the rock piles, in the shrimp-specific substrate I've added, hiding under the leaves and the little balls. I don't think there's any chance that that betta will just destroy that entire population of microfauna. But that's what I'm going to do with this YouTube channel, is test like this. We're going to continually check this over time. 3-month, 6-month, 12-month updates. My thought is I'll never have to feed this betta. He will be able to live like that permanently without adding food to the bowl. Now I might sometimes add it. If I never get any kind of buildup of nitrates or ammonia, I'll be adding food in. Even if the betta doesn't eat it, we want some food to feed the plants. That's the only thing I think that needs to be done, is learn how that's going to balance out. Do we have too much nutrients from all these microorganisms, or are they breaking all that down and there's nothing for the plants? So I will have to keep track of making sure we have enough nutrients building up for the plants to feed off of. And this is going to be a lot of fun for me to watch as I see all these little microorganisms. They're swimming around, they're climbing on top of each other. So I hope you check back in and see how this does, and watch some of our other videos about these experiments and the koi pond outside and the 125-gallon brackish tank. I appreciate you taking time to watch this video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.